Okay, so Visos has up a video about a week ago called Why Are Things Cute? It's a video that's worth checking out. I'm going to post a link to it. One of the things that it made me think about that I want to try to think more about, sort of explore, is why are things tragically aesthetic? You know, from where comes the tragic aesthetic? And one of the great resources for me that I've encountered anyway is Bakhtin, or Mikhail Mikhailovich Bakhtin, in his book Art and Answerability. And he says something like this, that individuals from within their own lives, just from within their own perspective, they have a kind of ethical orientation. And when he says an ethical orientation, he kind of means like this, like people have a a set of values or goals or morals, orientations, kind of character that's all together, and they're trying to do things, trying to achieve certain goals, bring about certain ends, and they could have resistances or obstacles, but the person in their ethical striving, they simply try to bring about their ends or to achieve what they I think is an alignment with their values or is a fulfillment of their character given the situations that they're in and all this kind of stuff. I mean, we have an ethical desire to fulfill what we see as serving certain interests, whether those are self-interests or larger interests. There is a kind of character or moral sensibility of the individual that gets inscribed into what they're trying to do, what they're trying to bring about. And again, it's the ethical character of an individual from their own life. Now, that's very different than how that appears from the outside. So some of this gets difficult because we're so good at adopting the position of the other that we render some of this light into our own lives. But what he suggests is that the ethical strivings of the individual, when they're looked at from the outside, the other brings what he calls a surplus of seeing, or what he also calls it a transgredience. That is, we cloak the other's ethical strivings in an outsidedness that is a rendering of that ethical striving as an aesthetic accomplishment. Somehow, self-other relations are caught in an ethical aesthetic dynamic. And again, when we watch others in their ethical strivings, it becomes aesthetic. And it can be even something, you watch a dog chase a toy, you can find it to be very aesthetically pleasing. But when you watch a child build a set of toys, when you watch, sort of play with a set of things, for the child it can be a kind of ethical accomplishment. It has some senses of aesthetics in bringing the thing about, but the tragic aesthetic is really interesting. And if you think of something like Shakespearean play or Shakespearean plays, they're you have this whole set of drama that unfolds before an audience, and the different characters with all of their their values, their goals, sort of what they're up to, and it has, from the perspective just of the character, it's a kind of ethical trajection or trajectory in time toward some end or some goal. But for the people who are on the outside, we look at it and we cloak it, right? We turn it into a kind of aesthetic whole. And I think part of what's interesting is, how does life have that or gain that, maintain that? Now, I think obviously in some ways it gets it just simply from learning how to watch others, to see others, and to imagine how others are seeing us. I think that's part of the dynamic of the character. Now, it's interesting to think about the role that religion probably played in rendering the lives of the people who were living them turning their ethical strivings into what they imagined as a, I guess, a theater for the gods. If you think of modern theater being us watching people in their actions and the kind of aesthetic pleasure that we get from maybe the cathartic release of watching others suffer the equal difficulties of life, the kind of quandaries that they face, those kinds of situations which habitually reoccur and which need some purging of fear or of pity, and of how we deal with that. And then to imagine that, in the way that the early Greeks imagined that the gods watched them and the gods were interested in human affairs, and as if the gods could take pleasure in human dealings. And I think as you move to modern monotheistic Christian orientations, it's as if the belief and the imagining that there is a highest mind who can watch one's ethical strivings and cloak them with that outsidedness, it it turns the person's ethical action into an ethics that has an aesthetic character. It can have this sort of tragic aesthetic character to its ethical strivings. And maybe part of the fear that some people have is the loss of that tragic aesthetics with a kind of literalism that gets ushered in by scientific, secular, atheistic thought. I don't know that that's necessarily what will be the case. Now, there is something about it that would, people would probably want to think about. What does it mean for a person to be able to imagine or to think about themselves as if their deeds, as if their doings were unfolding before a cosmic witness, and their ability to imagine that shedding a kind of aesthetic light upon their ethical engagements. Again, it's a fascinating issue. I don't know, though, that it really necessarily gets ushered out or is undercut by the scientific worldview. Now, I think it can potentially be for some people. We'd have to get it to haggle, but it seems like, I guess, there are different ways that film, modern cinematography, modern sensibilities of self-other, things like being able to post a video that is available to, I guess, the world, and then the kind of imagination that's entailed in making a video, the capacity to see one's own values and morals and orientations caught within a network of otherness, which turns it into, I guess, a tragic light, a comic light, but it has more than just individuals in their relation to their objects or their